We are now recording. It is Friday, July 6th, or 7th, sorry, July 7th. And we have a few things I'd like to cover today. Some of them are about this week's stuff and some of it's about next week's stuff. And then again, at the end of this conversation, we'll kind of see what other questions and concerns you guys have. We are more than halfway done with this course, so we're plugging right along here. I'm just going to start out in modules here, and I'm going to take a look at what you guys were asked to do this week and just talk about a few things I'm noticing in some of your submissions. So tonight is Unit 3, and right now I have shared my screen with you guys, so you should be able to see what I see, which is I'm in our Canvas course looking at Unit 3 module. Can you just type yes or no whether you can see what I'm looking at here? Karen, can you see? Looks like I heard from Terry, Lynette, and Danny. Okay, so are you on a phone or are you on a computer? Because you should be able to see what I see. Okay, I'm gonna move along since we're recording. So, okay. So Unit 3, you guys were asked to do a couple of things. The first thing was you were asked to create a discussion. And I like to pull up examples of my discussions and just talk a little bit about a couple of options you guys have. I want to go a little further into some of the basics when it comes to creating a discussion. So first of all, I'm going to pop into one of my current courses right now, and I'm going to go check out a discussion and show you guys a little bit of information about not only the directions, but also the options when you're creating it when it comes to due dates and grading and all of that good stuff. So I'm going to pull up this one right here. Okay. Actually, let me get a different one. Okay, so this is the first week's discussion. Here's what I'm noticing for some of you guys when you're creating your discussion. Some of you are not maybe being as specific as you might want to be, especially when it comes to what your expectations are of your students. So I'm going to show you an example of mine, which I think is really specific. And this comes from years of teaching online and me learning that the more specific I am, the more likely I'm going to get responses from my students that meet the guidelines. So first of all, what I think is really important is that even if in your syllabus you said, hey, you got to do your first discussion by Wednesday and your replies by Sunday, I still think that you should absolutely put those due dates in the actual directions, which is, this is when you're creating the discussion initially, okay? You need to remind them every single time. By Wednesday, here's what you're doing in your initial response, and then by Sunday, or whatever due date you've selected, you need to respond to this many students, okay? A couple of you have asked me if you thought that it was reasonable to have the initial discussion and replies due the same day. And my response to that would be, I don't think that's a reasonable turnaround time. In my experience, what ends up happening if you say like, hey, everything's due by Friday, is that you get the students who are very diligent, they go in early, and then they're the ones who end up having to log back into the discussion multiple times because they're waiting for those students who procrastinate to respond. And so what ends up happening is it creates unnecessary stress for your diligent students, and then the ones who procrastinate just kind of swoop in at the last minute and do all three responses at the same time. So my recommendation to you guys, and then when I took an online class for 2 years through CSU Fullerton, I did the reading certificate program, and I had a teacher who did a 24-hour turnaround time. So it was like you had until Thursday to do the initial one and Friday to do the responses. And I still felt that that was not enough time. So my recommendation is that you give your students a minimum of 48 hours to participate in the discussion and come back to respond. And that way they can actually have time to thoughtfully reflect. I think if you make it due the same day or even 24 hours, then they're just rushing through it and they might just go through the motions. I personally do Wednesday, Sunday deadlines. That's just my personal choice. But I notice some people do Friday, Sunday. I survey my students every semester and ask them if they like the Wednesday, Sunday due dates, or if they'd rather have like Friday, Sunday, or like Thursday, Sunday. And they always say that they like the Wednesday, Sunday because it spreads it out a lot. And again, if students don't want to do homework over the weekend, there's no reason they can't just come in Wednesday and then maybe even by Thursday or Friday or that same day, they can just get everything done. They don't have to use the weekend. But of course, a lot of them like it because they work. I am very specific. I tell my students exactly how many words I want their response to be, because if I don't, I get students who tend to just write like one sentence. And I feel that they're not putting in the effort I want them to put in. I tell my students to type out their discussion in a Word document so that they can not only spell check, but then of course they don't have to manually count the words because Microsoft Word will do it for them. And it makes their lives a little easier. And then I'm very specific in their responses. I say you have to do 2 students. And I say that I want them, since it's threaded, I want them to refer to their students by name. So when they do a response, they have to say, hi, Sarah, or Sarah, comma, and that way it's very clear. And I tell them that their responses to other students need to be at least 15 to 20 words, because otherwise, again, you'll get students who'll just say, hey, I liked your response, period, and then that's all they write, and it's not very specific. So that's one thing to think about, is just, again, the more specific you are in your directions, the better responses and the higher quality you're going to get from your students, okay? The next thing I want to show you guys is some really important options when it comes to grading and rubrics, as well as due dates and things like that. So I've already assigned a rubric for this discussion, but normally if you hadn't assigned one yet, you could click here and this would say add rubric instead of show rubric. And then you would go in and you'd either create one from scratch, or if you're like me and you use the same rubric for all the discussions the whole semester, you can like just re-upload that same rubric. You don't have to recreate it every single time you do a new discussion. So I'll show you guys my rubric just so you can see an example of one. Can you guys type in yes or no and let me know if you're able to see this assignment rubric that I just pulled up? So just type yes or no for me so I know you're still with me. Perfect. Great. So I just like to do 2 categories, which is similar to how Chris has created the rubrics in our course too. And even though it's designed as a credit, no credit, just keep in mind that when you guys are grading your students, you can go in and give them like a custom points. So for this one, it says, did they answer the initial discussion prompt fully and on time? Did they include and meet the word count requirement, and were they respectful? And I say mostly free of grammar errors. So if they have a couple typos, I'm not going to give them a bad grade. But if their response is so clearly not spell checked that it's hard to understand it, I might give them a 4 out of 6 on this part, you know, because I want them to step it up a little bit. Usually with the student ones, it's they either did it or they didn't. But what if they responded to 1 student and not 2? Well, then I can just manually right here put 2 points instead of a 0 or 4. So when you're doing the rubrics, again, you can actually go in and you can give them a custom score, or you can just click the full marks and then it would automatically go boop, boop, okay, 10 points, and then you can kind of navigate through. Just so you know, though, with discussions, it doesn't automatically grade your students. You are going to have to go in and you're going to have to grade them yourself. The quizzes are the only thing, like Blackboard and Canvas, that you can set up to automatically grade for you. But everything else, you're going to have to go in and look. This leads me to our due dates. And again, just to back up a little bit, the more specific you are here, the less you have to manually write for each student. So the way I do it is I give my students a lot of feedback on their rough drafts and things like that. But when it comes to discussions, I just check the boxes and grade them, and I don't, have to expand on it, because pretty much they can figure out if they got a 6 out of 6 here, they must have done that. Or if they got a 0, it's because they know they didn't do their post on time. They can usually figure that stuff out. But for the most part, if you're very specific here, you don't really have to write things for each student, which makes your life a little easier on some of these assignments that maybe don't really require you to put so much time in, so you can spend your time better elsewhere, like on their essays or exams and things like that. Okay, so here's the other thing I want to show you guys that's really important, and I like this feature. Okay, so when you're creating the discussion and you've posted the directions and all of that, and then you can tell it, okay, I want them to be threaded. For the first one, I don't do this, but for later in the semester, I do say users have to post before seeing replies. If you're asking your students like, hey, I want you to talk about the 3 most important things you learned from this chapter, this is a nice feature, because then students can't just copy what other people said, and it cuts down on like plagiarism and cheating. And so that you can really make it so that they can't see anyone else's stuff until they've posted their initial post. And again, I like it because it really helps cut down on like the cheating or students who maybe didn't do the assignment. Okay. Now, when you're grading it, you can decide how many points you want your discussions to be worth throughout the semester. I use points. Some people like percentages. Some people want to put complete, incomplete. If you put complete, incomplete, then I'm pretty sure if you put points here, they either get a 0 or the full 10. So then you don't have the ability to kind of give them a score with like a ranged score. So I prefer just doing points. And then here's the part that's also really important for you guys. Okay, let's say that you want the discussion to be, the initial discussion to be due by Wednesday, and then they have Sunday to reply. Then you have to put Wednesday as the due date, because if you don't, it will put on your calendar for your students to see that they have until Sunday to do the whole thing, and that confuses them. Plus, when you go to grade it, you want to know whether they went in there before Wednesday or not. So by doing this, when you go to grade your students, anybody who put their first post like Thursday or later, it will say this student submitted this assignment late. And that way you know, okay, maybe I'm only going to give them credit for their replies to other students, but I'm going to give them a 0 on the initial response part because they didn't do that part on time. So what I do is I open up the discussion about a week before. I do my modules a week early in case students want to work a little ahead. So you can see that even though they had until Wednesday the 14th, they were able to get in a little early on this one. But I keep it open until Sunday. That way they can get their responses done, okay? Now, let's say that you wanted to not have 35 students responding to each other in the same discussion, because that's kind of a lot of people. You are able to create in Canvas groups. And so you could, if you have like 30 students, you could potentially create 2 or 3 groups where the same students are working with each other each time in smaller groups. And then what's kind of cool is you can stagger due dates. Another thing is, in the beginning of the semester, when we have students who are adding like beyond the first week, you can always come in here and check this out. You can say add, and you can create a separate due date for a student who added your course late. So let's say you don't want to open up the discussion to the whole class because you don't want people going, oh, I can go in and do stuff late. You can open it up for just a student who added your course late, but you don't want to punish them by giving them a 0. So you could just type in a student's name there and give them their own separate due date. And that way they can get caught up on the course without you having to open it to the whole class, which I think is a really cool feature, because it's not really fair to tell students who added late, you just have to get a 0 on everything from module 1, right? So I've done that. I did that this summer, and it was good because I could have those students catch up without opening it to the whole class. Okay, and if you're wondering how to create groups, you would just simply click on people, and under your people tab, you're able to create like some different groups with different students. And again, that might make things easier if you have a large class size. so that students kind of have their little core group, and when they're doing their discussions, they can only see those people's responses instead of the whole class. So that's a personal choice that you guys can decide what you want to do. And that's something to think about for that. Okay, that's all I want to say about discussions. Can you guys just type into the chat box any questions or comments that you have? So Terry says, sometimes when edited late, it shows late. Not really sure what you mean by that. Yeah, and I mean, it's up to your discretion. If you have a student, if you had a student who contacted you and said, hey, I'm having a family emergency, or I'm in the hospital, and you want to open it up for them, that's, as a teacher, that is your choice to decide if there's a student who you want to make a special, exception for, and that way you don't have to open it up to the whole class. Okay. Okay, do you guys have any questions or comments about creating discussions? So if not, you can just type no, and if you do, just type your question in, and I'll make sure I answer those before I move on to the next thing. Okay. Yeah, at the end, we can definitely go into more depth. Okay, so now that we've talked about this, there's the other thing that you guys are supposed to do this week. Most of you did a really good job. Some of you, I think, could use a little bit of clarification, and that would be creating calendar stuff. So yeah, I can show you how to create a rubric right now. I'll do that right now. Let's see here. So I'll do it right now for you, that way you can see. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to discussions, and I'm just gonna create a fake pretend discussion right now from scratch. Let's see here. Oops, get out of here. Okay. I'll call it sample discussion. Okay. Can do my due dates. What's today? Let's see. We'll say it's due by next Wednesday. Okay. So when you guys are creating a discussion, you can't create the rubric until you've actually created the assignment. So I have to go down here after I've typed in my directions, and I've decided how many points it's worth, and I've put all my due dates, and then I hit save, right? And then what I have to do is, now that I've created it, now I can go in and create a rubric. So you're going to click on that little asterisk there and see how it says add rubric. So I would click on add rubric. Now here's the cool part. You have a choice. You can create one right now from scratch, so I'll show you how to do that. But another thing you can do is you can click find a rubric. And if you're like me and you've already made a rubric, so this class is 9715. So I'm going to go to this class. I'm going to click over here and look at how it's showing me all of the rubrics that I've already created. So do I want to create a discussion rubric from scratch, or do I want to just select one that I've already made and not have to make a new one every time? So what I would do is go in here and choose the appropriate rubric that I've already created in the past, okay? But let's just say I hadn't created one yet. Then this is how I would do it. I'd go up here, it'd say add a rubric. I would want to create a title. So I'm going to call it discussion rubric, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to decide what your criteria are and how many criterion you want. So again, for something like a discussion, you're probably going to want to keep it simple. You're probably just going to want two things. You're going to want the initial post that's due by Wednesday, right? And you can look at how you can type as much stuff as you want in here. You can go on and on and on, or you could just keep it simple, right? And then I want another one. Replies due by Sunday. And again, you can type whatever you want in here. You could type a whole paragraph if you'd like. And then I'm going to say, well, I like their initial thing to be do 6 points, and I'm going to say that the replies are 2 points each, 4 points for a total of 10, right? And then you come down here, and here's your 3 options. If you say, I'll write free-form comments when assessing students, then basically it's saying you probably don't really want to put too much information here if you're just going to manually type it in anyway. So instead, what you're going to want to say, especially if you've spent a lot of time like putting the criteria here, then you don't really want to have to like type new information for all of your students. Then you would just select here, use this rubric for assignment grading. And then when you actually go into grade students later, it's going to pop up for you and automatically when you're grading. And again, the more specific you are here, the easier it is for you to click the boxes for students and not have to write something every time for every student. And then you would just hit create rubric, okay? So that's how you do that. Pretty simple. You can be as specific or simple as you want when it comes to creating your rubrics. That's your choice. Oops. Let's see. Cool. Good. Okay. So now let's go to the calendar item. Now let me just remind you guys of something. You can go here to calendar, but that is your instructor calendar. When you have to create a calendar item for a specific class, you have to actually go in to that specific class. So when you guys are going into a specific class, you would click on settings, right? Which is this bottom left thing here. And the 2 most important things, in my opinion, under settings for now are the fact that you can go to student view here, but you can also access that individual course calendar. So when Chris and I are asking you guys to create a calendar item, what we're asking you to do is to think about the fact that when you guys assign homework, when you create an assignment or a discussion or a quiz, it's automatically going to put it on the calendar for students. So you don't need to create a separate calendar item for that, okay? Also, you don't want to put something on the calendar that would be better as an announcement. Like, hey guys, I graded your stuff. That's an announcement. Calendar items potentially should be existing on your calendar probably from day 1 of the semester, or at least early on in the semester. So an example would be something like the add drop deadline. You know, when we teach summer school online, our classes started June 12th, and the add drop deadline was like the Thursday of that week. So you could click on that date, and then you could say, you know, add drop deadline. And what time? You would just say like 11:59 p.m., right? And then you would just hit submit, okay? You can also go into more options, and you could actually type a little description for your students to see, okay? Other than the add drop deadline, some other examples of good calendar items would be, okay, let's say that the Literary Arts Festival at Grossmont College is happening and I want my English students to attend. I might want to actually put the specific events, like the poetry slams at 12 o'clock in Griffin Gate here, and our guest speaker, Urea, is going to come this night, 7 p.m., Griffin Gate. So on-campus events are really good. I noticed some of you guys are going to do field trips with your students. A couple instructors are going to have their students meet them at Balboa Park at one of the art museums. Another instructor is going to have his students go to the powwow. So those are all really good calendar items because you can put an off-campus event. You can put the day and time. You can put a little paragraph, explain to students where to meet you. Those are all good examples of calendar items. So again, do not create a calendar item for an assignment that already exists, because then you're just doubling down. You're putting the same thing twice. And do not create calendar items that would be better as announcements, like, hey, I'm going to be in the office today, or hey, I finished grading your papers. Those are things you want to put as announcements. Okay? Do you guys have any questions about the calendar items? I know some of you have already completed that assignment and already gotten some feedback. Okay? But any questions about how to create a calendar item or what kind of calendar item is appropriate? So if you could just type no if you don't have a question, and then type your question if you do. That way, if you say no, then I know I can move on. So for reading assignments, that should be in your modules. And I would not put a calendar item for that. So just keep that in mind, that unless you are having them do something with that reading, it might not be a good use of the calendar. It's up to you though. If you want to manually put the readings in, you could do that. Just keep in mind that if you're going to do that for the readings, you're going to, you're probably going to do that for everything. And you don't want to overwhelm students with too many calendar items. So for my calendar, I only have actual like assessments. So when they have a quiz, a discussion, or like an actual writing assignment due, it's on the calendar. But when it comes to like every single PowerPoint they have to read, if I put every little thing on here, the calendar would look really overwhelming to students. So I think just things you grade is what I would stick with. And then other things like add drop deadline, field trips, things of note. But if you start putting everything on there, it kind of makes the calendar useless because it's just too much information. And don't forget that when a student sees the calendar, what I'm talking about is going to be when they go to the syllabus view in your course, this is what they're looking at, right? The course summary. So when you create a manual calendar item, it will put it in here for students. And again, so if you put like every little assignment, it might be too overwhelming for the calendar part. I would just put the major stuff, major things. Okay? Any other questions about that? Okay, so the next thing that I want to cover is something that you guys are doing next week. So you guys, for this week, you did discussions and you did calendar items. Next week, you guys have to create an assessment and use the speed grader function. And so when we say assessment, you have a couple of options, okay? Keep in mind that when you create a quiz, Canvas will automatically grade it for you. So since that happens, chances are you're not going to go in after a student's been graded on the quiz and give them more feedback, right? For most of us, they get the score and they might have the options of like, reviewing their feedback, but chances are you're just going to let that score lie, and that's going to be the end of that. So when you're creating a quiz, always in the quiz title, be very specific about what the quiz is. I would never just say quiz 4 and let them figure it out later what quiz 4 is about. So in the title, I always say like quiz 4 is based on our textbook, this reading right here, right? And then I'm also very specific in the directions. Be sure to read the textbook selections thoroughly before taking the quiz, okay? Now, you guys have choices when you're creating a quiz when it comes to the options, okay? You're the instructor, so you get to decide. But in my experience, when you're teaching online and you have students who are registered with DSPS, they need extra time. And having timed quizzes can create a little bit of anxiety. So I remember when I first started teaching online, I would give my students 10 minutes to take the quiz. And even though I felt that for a 5-question multiple choice quiz, that was probably plenty of time, I just realized it was a little bit easier if I gave them 30 minutes, or for some of them, just don't even give them a time limit. I mean, I'm an English teacher, so the quizzes for me are I just want to see if they've read the textbook selection. It's really the essays are the main part of the grade. So I don't really want to like be too strict with these quizzes because in my opinion, for my class, it's not the most important part of the class. So I let my students take the quizzes twice and I give them 30 minutes. And honestly, they probably only need about 5 minutes to take them. They're not that hard. But I just feel like by giving them 2 tries in 30 minutes, what's really great about that too is it makes my course a little bit more accessible for my DSPS students because they have never complained that that's not enough time for them. And so that's really nice because then you don't have to go in and reopen the quiz and things like that. So you can put a time limit if you want. Again, I don't recommend doing anything shorter than 30 minutes just because it might, you might run into some problems. Another good thing about giving them 2 tries, So I know in our Canvas course, you guys are allowed to take the quiz as many times as you want. I don't like doing that because then I worry that students will just not do the reading and they'll just take the quiz over and over again until they get 100%. So by giving them 2 tries, they have to like try harder, right? They have to actually do the reading. But let's say a student tries to take the quiz and something happens, like their computer freezes. By giving them those 2 attempts, it also makes my life so much easier because now I don't have students emailing me saying, oh my gosh, I was taking the quiz and it timed out and I don't know what happened. Can you reset it for me? It's like ever since I gave them 2 tries, I've never had to reset a quiz. And so that really just has opened up my time, so I'm not wasting time dealing with like annoying things like, okay, these individual case-by-case things where you have to kind of take the student's word for it that they weren't doing anything wrong and their computer froze and they don't want to get a 0. So again, if you give them 2 or 3 tries, it really like lessens the anxiety for everybody, the teacher and the students. So I recommend that you do at least 2 tries, if not unlimited, but it's up to you. You can also say like, do you want the students to be able to see their the feedback or the responses? Do you want them to see the correct answers or only the ones they missed? Do you want to show 1 question at a time, or do you want them to be able to see all of them? Okay. And then there's a really cool option as well, because if you create quiz banks, let's say like for this reading assignment, I created like a total of 10 questions. One really awesome thing you can do if you're worried that in your online classes that you have students who, like I've had students who are married to each other and like friends, and if you're worried that there's like a cheating problem, for each student you can make it randomize which 5 of the 10 questions they get, and that way it's less likely that they can just copy each other. So there's lots of cool things that Canvas has if you really want to play around with that. I'm not going to go over it today just because it's like a whole rabbit hole we could go down, but you guys are welcome to review the faculty Canvas guide on how to create quiz banks and all that different stuff. I don't personally do the quiz banks because again, I don't really find that the quizzes are all that important in my class. They're minor. Another thing you can do is, again, you can decide if everybody has it due that day, or do you need to add a separate due date for a different student if they told you they're going to be out of town or something. For this one, you don't want to keep it open beyond the due date because otherwise students are going to go back in and try to respond. So the due date and the available until date should probably be the same unless you want them to be able to go back in and view feedback and stuff like that. So when I create the quiz and I'm here under the questions, one thing is like one option you guys have is you can create feedback. So when a student gets something right, you could have feedback that says, you know, good job. And then you could also have feedback if they get it wrong that says, oh, go back to page 5 and review. And so that's another option you have too is you can see I don't have any feedback on this particular quiz, but there are some quizzes where I have specific feedback where if they got it wrong, I tell them where to go look to review that information. If you decide to import any quizzes from Blackboard to Canvas, in my experience, it has transferred all of not only my questions, but my feedback as well. So Canvas does a pretty good job of importing stuff from Blackboard without you having to change anything other than like maybe the due date, obviously. So that's kind of nice. And again, since for quizzes, most of us are going to have these quizzes automatically graded, you're probably not going to spend your time going back into the gradebook after they've been graded and give students feedback. Unless you notice the students like getting a 0 on all of them, and then you decide to go in and say, hey, do you want to like come in and talk to me in my office? But for the most part, when it comes to you guys creating an assessment for next week, you might want to think about creating something where you can do more feedback, like an essay or an exam, or you know, maybe the first week of class, you ask your students to submit some sort of success survey where they have to fill out whether they've taken an online class before. You have a lot of options for that. Since I'm an English teacher, obviously the most common assessment I have are essays, right? So I would go under assignments if I wanted to check out some of my essay prompts and things like that. And so we can take a look here for essay number 2, which is a pretty complicated assignment in my English 120 class. So when you're creating an assessment or a specific type of assignment where you're probably going to give your students specific feedback, like using a rubric, right? We don't really use rubrics on quizzes because they're automatically graded. So you'll notice that my students have an actual prompt for the essay that they've already read that is not attached to the submission link because they've already seen it in an earlier module. So I have the directions here that just remind them, now that you've written your essay, don't forget to MLA format it. And here are the 3 doc files that I accept. I let them know, look at the rubric below before you submit it in case you'd like to see how you're going to be graded. And again, I have a rubric here. My essay rubrics are pretty simple because I end up giving my students super specific feedback. So you can see here that for this essay, I just break their rubric into sections, and then when I'm grading each student, I give them very specific feedback. So for the 100 points, 20% of their grade will be title and introduction with their thesis. 40% of their grade, 40 points out of 100 is going to be their body paragraphs. 20% or 20 points is conclusion. And then 20% would be, they have to use special templates from our book. They have to have proper grammar and MLA. And I'm going to show you guys what it looks like from the student's perspective here. Lynette's asking, how do you give an individual DSPS student the extra time? That's a good question. You would have to create a separate due date for that student, but I'm not sure if you do a separate due date that it will give them a longer time. So when it comes to quizzes, you can't really give a specific student different time constraints than another. And that's why I was telling you guys that you might consider making your quizzes 30 minutes, an hour, or unlimited time, because you're not going to be able to give one student 30 minutes and one student 10 minutes. It will not let you get that specific. So that's why I make my quizzes 30 minutes, because it takes students probably 5 or 10 minutes to do it. So I'm automatically building in that 2.5 times the regular student amount so that my DSPS students, it's already geared toward them, if that makes sense. And it just keeps it easier. Okay, so I'm going to go into student mode and pretend like I'm a student in my own class and submit an essay. And then as the teacher, I'm going to grade that essay. And then once again, as the student, I'm going to show you guys what it looks like from the student's view when you give a student feedback on an essay or some sort of big assignment, okay? So I'm going to go here to student view. And then I'm going to go into modules. So yes, you can do short answer quizzes, and in that case, they would not be automatically graded by Canvas. You would have to go in and manually grade them, and that's totally an option for you. And that would be a good example of an assessment where you're actually giving them specific feedback. So do not just have to do true, false, multiple choice. It just depends, like I said, as a teacher, where do you want to put your time? I have to grade essays, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on short answer quizzes for an English class. But if quizzes and exams were my main way of assessing students, then I probably would consider it, right? Okay, so if I'm the student and I'm going to go submit essay 2, I would go to my week 4 module. I would click on the essay 2. Okay. And as the student, I can see the rubric ahead of time, which is nice. So I know, like, okay, this is how I'm going to be graded. And notice how you can do these little categories, and you can even add like more descriptors if you really wanted to, which is what I did. So like, for instance, a student says, Sarah, you're going to grade me 20 points out of 100 on the title and introduction, but what are you looking for, Sarah? Okay, well, an original and appropriate title. The introduction starts generally and ends specifically. The topic of television is introduced and contextualized before the article is mentioned. The article title, source, and author are mentioned in the summary. The audience, purpose, and tone are identified. And finally, a thesis or purpose statement ends the introduction. So I give them very specific things I'm looking for. That way, when they don't get the full 20 points, they can kind of tell, okay, this is my checklist. Did I hit all the marks or not? Okay. So if you don't want like this much information showing up in the box right now, you can just, you know, go ahead and do it as a description instead of the criteria. Okay, so the student will come here and they'll click submit assignment. So this is what I'm showing you right now. This is what you would do if you were going to have them submit like an essay or a Word document or whatever you want to do. So then they would have to upload their file. Okay, and they would select it from their own computer and they would hit submit assignment to submit their essay. Okay, now if I'm going to leave my student view and I'm going to go back to my instructor view and see, hold on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can show you guys my gradebook without showing my students. Okay. Okay, so when you click on the grades tab right here, it will bring up all of your students, and just like Blackboard, it will show you all of the columns of every assignment that you have going on, right? So once you click on your student that you want to grade, and this is my test student, and you want to see their essay, this is what you're going to see, which is not that different from Blackboard, right? So the document will show up, okay? And you have a couple options. You could just write some comments in the comments section. Okay, like, great job, okay? Or you could be much more specific. And this is what I like to do. So I let them know in the comments, hey, something's gonna be up here. You need to read this, right? So then you click, when you click a view rubric, see, you're gonna see just what you saw earlier. And again, you could just say like, okay, yeah, 100 looks great. But you can also put a very specific score, like you get an 18 out of 20 on your introduction, you get a 36 out of 40, and of course it's going to automatically calculate for you. I recommend too that of course in these little comment buttons that you tell them why, okay? Your introduction was great, but your title was not original. Maybe they just put the article title instead of their title, or body paragraphs. Great examples to support your claims, but you need better transitions between body paragraphs. So you can put that specific feedback there, and that way they know why they got the grades they did, right? Okay, you could just keep it simple. Good job. You get a 20 out of 20 on that. Missing templates. You didn't underline your templates. So, okay, you get a 15 out of 20 on that part, right? And then once you save it, it's going to populate that score in for you. Now, let's say a student submitted the essay late and you have a policy where you take off 10%, then you could even come down here and say, okay, you got a 89 out of 100, but minus 10 points for late submission. And what you could do is you could go back up here, and even though this is 89, you can change this to a 79, right? So that's everything you could have done in Blackboard too. It's really not that different from Blackboard. I do like the rubrics a little bit better in Canvas. And then just like Blackboard, you have the little ability here to do comments right on the text. So I can click this little tool here, right? And I can say, okay, let's see here. Okay, you needed a comma right here. So I'm going to highlight the section and let them know, comma needed, right? So you can do little in-text comments that they'll be able to see as well. You can do like a highlighting tool. You can do a cross out. So I could say, oh, that's an unnecessary word. Why do you have that there? And I could do a strike through, right? And if you mess up, you just click it and delete it. Okay. So pretty standard stuff. It's really not that different than Blackboard. When a student comments on your comment, they comment here, if you have your notifications set up, then it should send you an email through Canvas, or not through Canvas, but it'll email your GCCD and say, so-and-so commented on their submission. And if you don't do that, you'll never know that they commented on it. So it's a good idea to make sure you have that set up, and so that you know when your students are commenting. One annoying thing that happens that I've had a problem with is students, even though the assignment is gone, students can still access the comments after an assignment is gone. So I have had some problems with students who have come in late and said, sorry, my assignment is late. And then they clicked attachment right here and they put it in the comments section instead of how I showed you before, where they should have been submitting it to the link. And then they're like trying to put it in the comment section late. And I don't think that students could do that on Blackboard. So that's one thing that's kind of gotten on my nerves with Canvas, is students try to submit stuff late through the comment section. So I've just had to nip that in the bud. And then I've just written them a comment back that said, please do not submit any assignments in the comment section, you know, and remember that I do not accept late homework. They can turn in an essay late, but I don't take late homework. So that's one thing that that I have found to be a little frustrating. And I think most students would not act like that, but you have those couple of students who try to push it. So you just have to nip it in the bud and send them, maybe even send them a personal message saying, hey, it is not acceptable for you to do that. From an English teacher's perspective, not only do I not take late work, but when they submitted a document down here, they expect me now to download that document to my computer, which is dangerous when it comes to viruses. Like, I'm not going to download a document. I shouldn't have to. With Canvas, you can see here, I can view this document without having to download it. So not only are they putting you at risk by submitting links here, but it's also not going to use the plagiarism checker either. So that's what I let them know. I say, hey, you know, I'm not downloading anything to my computer, and I should never have to, right? And it's the same thing with my students. When I put documents on Canvas, I always create a preview for my students so that they don't have to download anything to their computer if they don't want. So I just try to be mindful about that for them and also for myself. So if I want to leave the page, what I can do now is I can go back once again to the student view and see what my instructor did for SA2. So I'm going to go back to student view. I'm going to go to grade. Now, so this is how the student sees the rubric that you just commented on. They would go to grades, and you can see how when they have a new grade, it gives them a little 1 in a circle, so they know, oh, look, Sarah graded something that I haven't looked at yet. Now, here's the part that you have to help your students with, and I would recommend you maybe even make a little video showing them how to do it, because some of them will not figure it out. So here's what they're going to ultimately do. A lot of them are going to come here and go, okay, I got a 93 out of 100 on my essay, and that's all they're going to do. Okay, but guess what? There's a comment and a rubric they can look at. And if you don't show them how to do it, they might not understand that they can actually click on this link here so that they can see a couple things. Number one, what they need to be able to see is my comment that I left them, right? So first of all, I said, please make sure that you view the specific comments I left for you in the grading rubric, which you can access through the grades tab by clicking on SA2 and view rubric. Okay, and so actually I should say show rubric. So the student has to actually come up here and click on show rubric to see this part. And then they can click the individual comments. So you might want to make a little tutorial video where you actually and use the student sample. Don't use a real student. But do, like maybe what I'm doing right now would be a good thing for you to do for your students the first time you grade a major assignment, and show them what they're going to have to do in order to view that stuff, okay? So they can click on that, And when they click on it, they can also click view feedback. And now they view feedback and they can see that I left those little comments for them. So there's kind of a couple different places they can look, and they might not know to look at all the places if you don't tell them, okay? So I would recommend that you show them how to view that stuff. Another thing they can do if they don't want to click on the essay is they could just click on the rubric and see what they got here and why, right? Good job here. You need to do this. They can click on the check mark or the comment button, and they can also view that comment button, okay? So there's a couple different ways students can see feedback, and again, you might have to show them how to do it. And this was a problem I had even in Blackboard, where if I didn't explain to students, hey, you have to actually go click on the rubric, they didn't ever look at it. And some of them would go all semester and say, how come you're not giving me feedback? And I'm like, I'm giving you lots of feedback. How come you're not seeing the feedback? So sometimes there's a disconnect, and you have to show students how to do it step by step. So you can do that two ways. You can make a video like I'm doing right now using Zoom and then upload it to YouTube or something. And you can also just do a screenshot by screenshot and put them in a Word document showing students step by step how to view the feedback. But again, you've got to do it through the test student. Do not use a real student so that you don't get in trouble for privacy issues. Okay, let's see. Can students resubmit the assignments after the due date if the assignment is left open? Yes. So if you leave the assignment open after the due date, students can resubmit it as many times as they want. They can keep going in. So one thing you might consider is, like for me, I'm an English teacher. My students have essays due, and then I grade them, and then they are allowed to go back in and do a revision for a higher grade. So what I do is I say, okay, the due date is June 27th, but I keep the link open for like 3 weeks afterward. And so it will tell you if a student has submitted it after the due date. It will tell you that the submission's late. Now, if you know that they're submitting it late because you told them to, then you just disregard that notice and give them whatever grade you want. But if a student, like, if you guys are like me and you know, like, for an essay or a major exam, if you give a student a 0, they're probably not going to pass your class. So I don't take any late homework, but I allow students to submit their essays up to a week late for a 10% deduction. And so I always keep my due dates for the major assignments. I mean, I have the due dates, but I keep the submission link open for usually a couple weeks afterward in case I need students to resubmit for whatever reason. And that way I don't have to keep reopening it for specific students. And then what's nice too is, like, if a student puts the essay up and they put the wrong document and they figure it out, they can go back and fix their mistake. As long as they did it by the due date, then there's no reason to dock them points. So, and that's one thing about Canvas that I like, is they can resubmit as many times as you want them to. Okay. Any other questions about grading? So now that I've showed you guys from the instructor view and from the student view what the grading looks like, any questions about anything I've gone over so far? Okay, Ruth, do you want to type in your question, or? Can Canvas grade a matching quiz? Yes, if it's matching, then Canvas can grade that automatically. The only thing they can't grade is if you have them do free form responses, same as Blackboard. If you're having them type in an answer, if you do a fill in the blank, you can make Canvas grade that as well, assuming the word or phrase that you're having them fill in the blank is pretty short. But when it's short answer stuff, you're gonna have to grade that yourself. How do I grade, how do I record my Zoom lectures? What do you mean by that? What do you mean, how do I record them? I mean, when you have Zoom software, which by the way is free, you just press record. You can record it or not. You should definitely record it. I tell my students, hey, we're having a live lecture Friday at noon. If you can come, extra credit. If you can't, that's okay, but I'll be posting it on YouTube later. And then you save the file when you're done recording it. It saves to your computer as like an MP4, and then I upload it to YouTube. And then once I upload it to YouTube, YouTube will automatically caption it for me. And then what I do on YouTube is I create it as an unlisted video. And that way, like, nobody in the YouTube land can see my private live lecture. But when I send my students the URL, they can. And I just like Chris Rogers, I send them an announcement, usually like within 48 hours, with the link to the unlisted YouTube video. And I say, hey guys, for those of you who couldn't come to my lecture on Friday, here's the video if you want to watch it. So it's the same thing that we do for this Canvas class is what I do for my students. I personally don't like to make pre-recorded videos very often because I find that I spend a lot of time perfecting them, and it's just not a good use of my time. I like to live lecture like I am right now with you guys and record it and put it up afterward, because I like that my students can ask me questions on the fly, and then I'm not like worried about it being perfect because I know it was live. And then students can just, who couldn't come, they can just view it later. And YouTube automatically captions videos for you when you upload them. They're not always accurate, but they're pretty darn close. So I don't always have time to send my video to the state chancellor's office that they've set up, like the three media solutions or whatever. You can, like, there's a special place you can send your videos and they'll caption them for you, but it takes a few days. So when it comes to my live lectures, I usually just rely on YouTube's subtitles for the captioning because they're pretty good. But if I was going to spend a lot of time on a pre-recorded video, I'd probably take the time to have it professionally captioned, especially if it was a video that I was going to use more than one semester. But my live lectures, I do new ones every semester. I don't ever keep ones from the past. Okay, anybody have questions on anything I've gone over? The calendar items, discussions, assessments, grading? Okay, Ruth, let's talk one-on-one about the whole Zoom thing later, because it's not really the topic of today's lecture. So I'll be happy to help you individually, but let's keep the conversation about the things I've gone over so far. How do you create a fill-in-the-blank quiz? Let's check it out. I'm going to leave student view. Okay. I don't do fill in the blank, so I'm assuming it's gonna be similar to Blackboard. It's not gonna be any different on how to create it, but let's check it out. Okay, so you can create a quiz within a module, or you can just go to the quizzes page and create it and put it into a module later. So I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna create a new quiz. Okay. I'll just call this sample quiz. You can put the directions here. You can tell them how much time and how many chances they're going to have. This is where you have all of the options, but you have to come up here to questions for questions, okay? So again, I'm just going to hit new question, okay? And then just like Blackboard, it's going to say, what kind of question is this? Multiple choice is the default, but here's fill in the blank, okay? You might want to say, question number 1. You might want each question to have a number. Maybe not, doesn't really matter. Okay, so this is how you would do it. Let's see here. Grossmont College is located in, wait, maybe even be more specific than that, in the city of blank, period. Okay, so then down here for your answers, you can do like a different option. So for instance, obviously that's like the best one, but you might also accept lowercase, or you might even consider accepting, like if they didn't put a space. It's your choice, you know. Multiple or fill in the blank is tricky, you know, because if students don't spell something right, it's going to mark them wrong. So you might have to put some variations that you're projecting are going to happen. So that's up to you guys. And then obviously anything that's not these is going to be marked wrong. That's how you create a fill in the blank question. Pretty straightforward on that one. Good question. Anybody else have a question about quizzes? Anything I've gone over? Okay, if we don't have any questions about what I've gone over, what I'm probably going to do is stop the recording and then turn on everybody's volume and we can just have a casual conversation, okay? So here we go. I am going to stop recording since that's all we have for today.